to participate in that discussion. We come now to item number 10, and if I can ask Julia Harker and Paul Wilson to come to the table. This is on recommendations from the Regulatory Committee on the review of food safety, our bylaw, and if I can ask Councillor Linda Cooper as Chair of the Committee to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the Regulatory Committee recommends the governing body adopt the Food Safety Information Bylaw Statement proposal for public consultation, but that will not go out till next year. Because of timeframes. The proposed bylaw continues to require higher risk food businesses that serve the public and are registered and verified by council to display a food grade. These include Auckland only cafes, restaurants and takeaways. All other food safety requirements are addressed at a national level under the Food Act, which is implemented by MPI councils and third parties, and that's why some don't display a grade. Staff have completed the assessment of the food safety bylaw contained in the attached findings and options report, and based on those reports, the Regulatory Committee approved the option to propose a new bylaw that improves the current bylaw and continues to require the same food businesses to display a grade. This was adopted, the statement of proposal was adopted by the Regulatory Committee this month, and now we need the governing body to formally adopt the statement for proposal for public notification. And if adopted, the panel will be appointed by the chairperson of the relevant committee following the 2019 elections. Public consultation will take place in early 2020. This does have an urgency about it because it needs to be adopted by April 2020 next year, before the May, it lapses in May 2020. So we have our fantastic staff here who do all this work to answer questions. And
Thank you very much. I'll ask Councillor Cooper to move that. Yeah. I'm happy to second that. Paul or Julia, is there anything that you wish to add to that? It's pretty straightforward. I don't think there was any controversy in the committee behind it, but if there are questions, there are no questions. Are there any comments? If not, I'll just put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much. Officers, for your contribution there, or your availability to contribute there, I should say. We now come to an item that I'm sure we'll go through just as quickly, and this is the bylaw on the Auckland Council policy on dogs and dog management. And if I can ask Michael Sinclair and Katarina Maki to come to the table, please. And again, I'm going to ask Councillor Linda Cooper to introduce and to move the recommendations, and also to thank Councillor Cooper. I think one of the hardest committees to deal with is the Regulatory Committee. There's an awful amount of work there, and I just want to acknowledge Councillor Cooper, the work that you put into that. It's really impressive. So I'll ask you to introduce the item, please.
Thank you. And first I just want to say a note, Hibiscus and Bays came to the committee, but they had already addressed these issues at the hearing, along with the letter from Great Barrier. They'd already addressed those at the hearings, either in a written or verbal form, as you can see in the an attachment, I think it's E of the report. So first of all, the panel's presenting its recommendations on the proposed changes to the Auckland Council policy on dogs and dog management bylaw. And we have our panel members, Councillor Casey, Councillor Walker, and I don't know if Glenn's here. I must be member. Oh, there he is. Good. I was going to say come and sit up here. That's great. That means he gets to contribute, which he should, because he's also been an equally great member of the panel. So the Regulatory Committee completed a review of the policy and bylaw in November 2018, and the proposers seek to improve dog management in Auckland by addressing emerging issues, providing a consistent approach to dog management. This will improve voluntary compliance and reduce public confusion. The governing body adopted the statement for proposal for public consultation in February 2019, so you see it takes quite a long time. So public submissions were received from 1st of April to 10th of May. All registered dog owners were notified. And I just want to give you the scale of how we try to reach out to people. 68,000 emails, 34,000 mobile text messages, and over 5,000 letters. So we really do get out to people. It was also promoted on social media, 413,000 unique browsers on Facebook, 114,000 YouTube, and 2,200 on the Have You Say website. So nobody can say, you know, that we didn't get out to people for people to be involved. There were over 8,000 submissions, 5,900 odd online, 1,900 pro forma, and 55 from stakeholder groups. And a majority of the respondents, 57%, were dog owners. So we did have, the public also had the opportunity to provide feedback verbally at 8 public Have Your Say sessions. 14 local boards presented their feedback in writing or in person to the panel on the 21st of June, and we deliberated over 3 half-day sessions in June and July. And our recommendations are in attachment A, summarised. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I just want to talk to the time and season because that was the most commented on. So the panel recommends in relation to the time and season definition, a definition of 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. from December the 1st to March the 1st. That's called the summer season. And to be adopted and applied in all areas where a time and season rule currently applies. That continues to allow local boards to define the out of summer time, which was what was called the winter rule, and seasons where appropriate. Note that the intent of the policy is that the out of summer season, which we formerly called winter because, but we didn't call it winter this time because part of the, that is March. We didn't think that was winter. Will not, as long as what the local board applies is not more restrictive to dog owners than the summer rule, because we'd expect in the out of summer that you'd have more dog access because there's less people. The local boards still have a huge set of tools to bespoke their area or to tailor-make their area for their community. So they can apply the time and season rule or not. They can have on-leash, off-leash or prohibited. And so there's still that ability to tailor-make for your area. So I asked the governing body to approve the panel recommendations. They've been very well discussed and thought out. And I'd like to thank Councillor Casey Walker and Councillor Wilcox, member Glenn. They've done an amazing job and it's been really good to work with them. So the panel are here to answer any questions, and also our staff, Michael and Shilpa, and who've done a lot of this work. Shilpa particularly has done a huge amount of work, and Katarina Maki, they're all here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Member Wilcox, would you like to add any further comments to that?
Yeah, just to say, for Māori, dogs were a passionate thing, and often wars occurred, family quarrels occurred, because the dog was a symbol of rangatiratanga and mana. So it's no different even today that we find that people are still quite passionate and very, feel very, can I say, not oppressed, but feel very precious when we do anything and make any changes to any dog rule. So it was good to see that we had that passion and we had that discussions with a lot of people. We met with a lot of people, and so I'm really happy that we did that. We think we got it right. We think that the original dog bylaw team got it right the first time as far as the hours were concerned. And I suppose the other thing is that I always like to remember this, is that the first dog in the Māori kōrero came from Maui turning his brother-in-law into a dog called Irawaru. And from then on it was a quarrel. So I suppose there's always going to be quarrels over dogs, but I think we've got a really good bylaw that we'd like you to recommend, we'd like you to take on board. And also, not only that, I think it's a tribute to my fellow panel members, and it's also a tribute to those people that came along. Sometimes the meetings got a bit robust, and it was, yeah, I can say there were a few times where I was glad there was another panel member there. But having said that, I think we'd like to recommend that the governing body accept our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The power of Maui is to be envied. Won't take that any further. That's great. Would any of the officers like to add to what has been said? Otherwise, I've asked Councillor Cooper to move it, and Councillor Casey, would you like to second? Oh, you have already. Okay, you've beaten me to it, but I had prescience there. Any other comments from officers that you'd like to add? So let's move into questions. There will be opportunity for comment. We'll do the questions first, Councillor, if that's okay with you. So it's moved and seconded. We now have the opportunity to ask questions, and the first question may be on behalf of Julia Parfitt and the Hibiscus and Bays local board. Michael, perhaps to you, she raised the question of the cost of signage and how we were intending to deal with that. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So the issues raised by the local board related to the default rule, and in the documents that you have that is covered by the section on organisation of Schedule 2. Just to emphasise, this is not about changing any of the access rules, it's just about changing the way that the access rules are presented within the policy and the bylaw documents. There's been some comments around how listing all of the off-leash areas will mean an increase in signage in order to reflect that into those areas. Signage has been a significant issue that has been raised throughout this process, and regardless of the approach that is taken to the presentation in the document, we recognise that signage does need to be addressed, and there does need to be a review of the signage across the board and how it is actually presented. So regardless of the decision that's made in terms of whether we present the off-leash or the on-leash rule in the policy, there will be a significant cost to council to make sure that the signage on the sites is accurately reflecting the rules and is presented in a way that is of most use to the dog owners and non-dog owners in Auckland to be able to know what those rules are.
So, in essence, that's a matter that still has to be addressed in terms of where the costs of that fall, or are you saying that that cost falls on council? On council, Councillor Cooper is saying, yep.
Through the chair,
Katarina?
yes, that cost falls on council. Because they are kind of one-off costs often for bylaws, they are put up in budgets when we start this process as cost pressures, and as the bylaw travels along, we keep raising these issues internally in terms of we're going to have a one-off budget amount to implement this bylaw. So I can confirm we have put those cost pressures up through the organisation, and the funding to do the signage is available.
Thank you. That clarifies it beautifully. Councillor Watson, first question.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, and just to clarify that cost will be significant, won't it? Because if we look at the number of locations that need new sign, will be at least 1,500. So we're dealing with a big cost, and conceivably more if we have multiple access points to these off-leash areas.
Through the chair, the most significant cost we have for all bylaws usually is for dogs and dog signage. However, there are also ways where we try to reduce that. So often we have the physical sign structures in existence, and we just need to print new decals of the new signage requirements and put them on the signs. I know you all know that you'll see many legacy bylaw rules still out in the public, but the physical infrastructure is often there. The other way that we also do things is electronically. So many people check the rules on smartphones, on sites. So we also need to update all of that electronically. And then, of course, at times we do need new signs. So we have put in as a cost pressure $1 million for signs to implement this bylaw. We would hope, though, through a variety of means, not to have to expend that total amount. But should we need to, that's what's available.
Okay, just further on the sign, so as I understand it now, there'll be no signs to say on leash, is that right?
The current signs that specify the rules that are in on-leash areas will not be removed. So the presumption is that if there isn't a sign, you should presume that it is an on-leash area, but we are not going to go around and remove all of the signs that are currently there that are correctly reflecting the rules that are in place in that area.
Okay, so from your response here, I'm taking it that in areas that I'm familiar, like the Te Ara Tahuna walkway, which is widely used by walkers, cyclists, and people with dogs, that those sort of very sensitive locations that are on leash, there will be still some signage to tell the people that it is on leash, because that's a concern of dog owners themselves, that people aren't wandering in there or using these areas that have conflict with other users and that are going to, predictably cause difficulties.
Absolutely. We will not be removing signage that accurately reflects the rules that are already in place.
Okay. In terms of the other concern brought up by the local board and with respect of some of these big new areas that are taking place both up north and south, where massive amounts of housing are going in a very short space of time, the default rule is on leash. Does that mean that local boards are going to have to come and go through a consultation process with the whole community for every big new suburb that opens up to ensure that there's a reasonable amount of off-leash facilities?
So when there's a new park or reserve being developed, there is generally a consultation process with the community in order to determine the most appropriate use and activities on those particular parks. Part of that process would be to look at what the appropriate dog access rules are, and community consultation on those rules can be combined with the community consultation that would be occurring in relation to the development of those new parks and reserves anyway.
Okay, so you don't see an issue there where this is going to be an onerous bureaucratic task for local boards in these big new areas that are proceeding at pace with lots of new parks? They're going to do them one by one.
As I've described, there is a process for engaging with the community to determine the most appropriate use of those spaces already, and it would be appropriate to include dog access as part of that discussion of most appropriate use of those spaces.
Okay, final question, Mr. Mayor, thank you, and that goes to this assurance that's repeated throughout our agenda that there will be no change to local dog access rules that are currently applied. We have a very long list, and I have certainly had locations suggested to me that aren't on the list, that are off leash. So am I to assume, given that assurance, that there won't be a change to what currently exists as a status quo, that if there is some error, clerical error, that hasn't picked up a particular location, that will be able to be added without any fuss?
Yeah, so through the chair. So we did ask local boards as well as the public to identify any places that were also missing. So those can be found in the marked up version of the attachment. But yeah, if there are any other clerical errors, we can make those changes.
And by clerical errors, I mean locations that haven't been identified through that process?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. And Your Worship, thank you for your questions relating back to Julia's presentation as well. They were very helpful, and clarification was very helpful. Also want to acknowledge the team, because I've been asking them questions through this process, and more recently coming up to the debate today, and I've had excellent responses from them. They're very prompt, and I just want to acknowledge that. I have a couple of questions. One would be, listening to your answers today, because there's the map that's been circulated around saying that it looks like the majority of the of Auckland area was originally off leash. as a default in many local board areas, the green in those maps. So my question is very specific. If we put aside $1 million to do the signage, if we had have stayed with as the default to being off-leash rather than on-leash, would we incur the same degree of signage cost? I've heard what you said, there are a number of signs that need to be put up to scratch anyway, but I'm just curious in terms of knowing, by going to on-leash, have we suddenly increased dramatically the number of new signs, not decals on existing signs, but the requirement for new signs compared if we had have gone to an off-leash? Just understand around the costs, Your Worship.
Through the Chair, that's a difficult question to answer because we do not know whether that change would have actually accompanied a direction to roll out more comprehensive signage anyway. So even if it had retained the presentation of the information as an on-leash across the region, firstly, that would have meant then having to update the signage in all of the areas that were previously or currently off-leash. And secondly, that may have been accompanied by a directive to actually upgrade all of the signage anyway. So it's a bit of a oblique question to be able to answer.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Maybe could you offer a degree of confidence in terms of, there was a lot of feedback that the signs under Auckland Council and the changes that we had made to the bylaw were still out of date? No, we hadn't got around them to update them all. What degree of assurance can we have that moving forward now that they will all be brought up to scratch, and how long might that take? So we haven't got confusion out there going forward.
That's the aspiration, is to make sure that all of our signage is correct. That will be a rollout process around that. It will take a bit of time to make sure that that audit is fully and complete. We would be hoping that it would be able to be completed within a year to 18 months.
Thank you for that. My other question, I think it probably relates a little bit back to what Councillor Watson's question is, and that's existing signage there that might be off-leash. And I did talk to you, Michael, I just want this to go on the public record. If there's existing signs out there, and we talked about example at Snell's Beach where there's an off-leash sign in place because there's the pathway and it changes from on-leash to off-leash halfway along. If those signs that are currently marked as off-leash, if they were damaged, vandalised, or removed, not by council, would they be replaced in the current form without change? The fear there, just to put in context, Your Worship, is that people are worried because the default is on-leash that those signs might not be replaced. So just clarification there.
Through the Chair, just once again confirming this isn't changing the rules or status, it's only changing the way that those rules are presented. If there is any signage that needs to be replaced, then they will be replaced with signage that accurately reflects the current rules that are in place in those locations.
And just one final question, Your Worship. It's, and again, I've had a head up with Michael around this. It picks up on Councillor Watson's question as well, that the if there's been beaches, parks or reserves missed off the list that should actually be off-leash, even though we've been through the local boards, or even though we've been through the public, you've said there's a mechanism where those could be corrected. Could you just clarify how that's done? So if the public identifies it, do they take it to their local board that then bring it to you with delegated authority to update that list? Could you just make it quite clear what that process is about how to get those possibly missed areas included, please?
So if you look at the resolutions that are included in the report, you will see that there is one there, Resolution F, which is to delegate authority through the Chief Executive to the manager responsible for bylaws to make any amendments to the bylaws in Attachment C of the agenda report and correct errors or omissions. So we would be able to use that particular resolution to enable officers to correct errors or omissions that had been made to the policy and bylaw through this process.
I'm sorry, Michael, I was just trying to be a little bit clear in terms of, so if I identified one, do I go to my local board to register that? Do I come to Auckland Council through a department? Just, do I ring the call centre? Just, what's the practicality steps? Are you able to outline that for us, please?
Sorry about that. Any of those sources would be able to get the information back through to us, and we would be able to update it. We also currently have a dog bylaws review website, which was used through this process. We can continue to have that open so that that could be used as an avenue to identify those areas directly to us as a team.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
And first of all, I should congratulate Councillor Cooper and colleagues and officers for this work. Obviously, it's not been an easy task, but I have a question, and it relates to page 79, section 84, bullet point 3, time and season definition. A majority of local boards oppose the proposed definition and stated a preference for local variation or an earlier end time and season. And I also have, as you have, the letter from our colleagues, Kath Hanley of the chair of the Waiheke Local Board and Izzy Fordham, chair of the Aotea Great Barrier Local Board. Could it be explained why the objections of the local boards, particularly the island local boards, were not supported?
Can I answer that?
Councillor Cooper.
So, yes, that's right. They opposed the 10 to 7 proposal that we put forward. So a lot of people opposed 10 to 7. They weren't saying they didn't, they actually said they wanted an earlier end time and season. That's what we've delivered. Yes, some local boards still wanted their own autonomy on the time and season. It was well discussed, well debated, and the panel came to the unanimous decision that it was better to just have one time and season rule, but we still had a suite of other tools that local boards could use to customise for their own area. At the end of the day, we had to make a decision, and what it came down to was that most people and a lot of local boards thought that it should be more access. Actually, Hibiscus Bays was one of the most supportive of having the shorter restriction, and most of our submissions came from north of the bridge about that. They didn't want it 10 to 7 because that was the original proposal, councillor. But the original policy back in 2012 was 10 to 5. So what we came to as a panel was actually that was right, and restricting dogs more wasn't right. So that's why we landed on 10 to 5, and we wanted to keep it consistent. And in particular, we did actually discuss Waiheke, and what we came to was, because of a large number of regional visitors, here we are trying to get consistency. Everybody across the region understands it's 10 to 5, then you go to Waiheke, oh, it's different. If it was just local people there, it would be quite different. So that's why we, in the end, and Councillor Casey did, put a case for that, but in the end, the panel just said, look, we need to be consistent. It's the one thing we've stuck to. The rest of the things, the out of summer season rule, will all have ability for on-leash, off-leash, prohibition. The local boards will be able to define that for their local area to suit their needs.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much. Clear answer. Councillor Stewart.
Oh, thank you. Some of the questions have been answered, but just reconfirming, dogs are prohibited on the foreshore, and that's most of the foreshores around the region. Is that correct?
Sorry, did you say dogs are or dogs aren't?
No, dogs are prohibited on the foreshore for intertidal mangrove and salt marsh areas. So all foreshores, dogs are prohibited.
No, that's not correct. Where are you reading that from?
Page 33.
sorry, I'm not able to find what you're referencing to. But in answer to
It's
your
under
question,
the Howick Local Board area, and it's under the title Dogs are prohibited on the foreshore, intertitle
Page
mangrove and
numbering.
salt
It's the
marsh
page
areas.
numbering she's not giving
Page
us right.
33.
It's of the printed full document, it's page 135.
135,
On
sorry.
the actual document, it's page 33, if that's helpful.
okay, thank you for that clarification. So just to confirm that that particular reference is to the local rules in the Howick Local Board area, which are determined by the Howick Local Board. So that is not applied to all beach and foreshore areas everywhere. That is the rule that their local board has created and has been carried through over into this document for the beach and foreshore areas within Howick.
Then you have to ask your.
Do you have further questions, Councillor Stewart?
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
So, a couple of questions. First off, just around flora and fauna, and this is really just a question for clarification. My understanding is that we've got more flexibility in the bylaw in the sense that if biosecurity comes up with an area, for example, where we've got carry dieback and there's an issue around dogs, then it's relatively easy to make temporary changes. That's in there, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so that's, I just make the observation that that's really good because that's a dynamic issue that we need to be able to respond to. The other question I've got just goes to the submissions that we received and also often related recommendations from the panel about improving the situation so that there are more fenced off areas to exercise dogs, more dog bins, possibility of bags, quite obviously dog exercise areas as we see overseas. So we've got stuff coming through the process that's making recommendations that go to budget, other things that we need to pick up. How are we addressing those things? And I appreciate that's not directly through this bylaw process, but nevertheless they were many of the things that came up.
Through the chair. So the process for that is if elected members entertain business cases through annual plan and long-term plan processes, as there is no funding really for that currently, or if a local board may decide it's particularly important to them and they may use LDI, but if it's something like a region-wide fund that's accessible to local areas, then a business case through the annual plan or long-term plan is the key way that that could be implemented.
Oh, would we not just pick up on this material and feed that into the annual plan process itself rather than putting everybody through another submission process and conceivably local boards as well?
Through the chair, it is the difference between the idea through submissions process and the funding to implement it. So, of course, officers can be requested to develop business plans for you to consider when you're considering funding priorities side by side with the many other funding priorities that you have. But we can, of course, look at that for the next long-term plan if you wanted to consider it alongside many of the other requests and priorities you will have.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Three hopefully very quick questions. First one, under financial implications, I just want to make sure that you think that all signage can be done within current budget, which you put as $1 million. It's not in the report, and I just wanted that. It's your expectation. You've looked at this, you know what it says, that's what you're thinking.
It is our expectation that that can be undertaken within the $1 million we've put aside, and we would hope that we might be able to find ways to do it for less than that. We are hopeful in the future that electronic signs that we have, like in other areas, where you can update regulatory information very quickly, would be a very cost-effective way to do some of this without constantly having to redo signs.
Good point. Okay, thank you. My second question is, maybe, I don't know who's going to answer this, but we've pretty much doubled the amount of time you can keep 2 or more dogs in an urban area. Why is that?
See what our deliberations were that you're allowed to keep a dog for, I think it was up to 14 days.
Currently, and then it's gone to 30.
No, well, the reason we did that is quite often you'll have, for example, and I'm not doing this for my mother, but my mother's looking after my daughter's dog for 6 weeks while she's in Europe. And if she'd already had 2 other dogs, she would then have to apply for a licence just for, a couple of weeks, which seems overly bureaucratic. So we felt that often, or if you had a visitor, someone was visiting you, you already had 2 dogs and somebody brought their little pet dog and they were staying for a month. We just thought it just gave people a bit more flexibility around their lifestyle. But once they've had it for a month, then they need to go and do that. So it was just about being a bit kinder and not making people jump through hoops to live their normal daily life.
Thank you for that. And then my final question has got 2 bits. This is an interesting time of our year, our political term. What was the hardest decision you had to make, and what's the best thing about this change?
Probably was the time and season rule, because that was the most contentious, because that was the most upset, because what we really heard loud and clear was people wanted to be out with their dogs more. People really wanted to, if they were going to be restricted on the beach till 7 o'clock, it meant for especially older retired people, they didn't want to, they want to have their tea, take their dog for a walk, have their tea, go home. People with young families, waiting till after 7 o'clock means, you can't get your kids in the bath, have their tea, all that sort of stuff. It kind of messed with people's lifestyle, and we felt that was really, not a good thing to do. We heard over and over, and we also heard over and over that often beaches were deserted in terms of the season length. Beaches were often deserted around Labour Day because it was often raining, and so why wouldn't you let dogs on the beach more? And it's still up to the local board. If they want to have those beaches, they can still, at other times, on leash, off leash, all of those sort of things. So it was really around just making sure that, or hearing people's desire to spend more time out with their dogs and have it at times that worked for them when they're busy, or they're very young or older. So I think that was really around it. It was hard because we knew that we wouldn't make all local boards happy, but at the end of the day, we were submitting to the public as well, and we heard loud and clear that they wanted a shorter season and more time on the beach.
Yes, the hardest thing is you can't please all the people all the time, and people have contradictory views. But I just want to acknowledge again to actually all of the panel members, you have gone through a process that has been thorough. Everybody's had the chance to be heard, and then you've made the decisions at the end of it. And I think while you'll never get an absolute consensus, I think that you are reflecting what a majority of your submitters and the people who you have talked to actually wanted out of this process. So congratulations to the panel for doing a really hard job. Last question is in the name of Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, boss. Pretty simple question, and that is, this gets passed, presumably local boards have input at changing things around. What is the local board's ability to review their decisions? Is there a time frame that what they've decided gets set in stone, or is it an ongoing process?
So there's 2 parts to answer to that. First is if the local board wants to review all of their rules across all of their local board, then that would be a process which they would have to request so that we could prioritise that as an activity. The second thing is we are currently developing a process for local boards to be able to review the rules on individual sites, which will be a lot simpler and more contained. A similar sort of approach to what we currently have with the alcohol bans when there is a request for a new individual alcohol ban on a new individual area, which will make amendments to individual parks a lot quicker and easier for the local boards to work through in future.
Thanks, Michael. So no set time frame they could start that. If they've got some issues that aren't current, right, they can actually massage this process and these rules going forward. So thank you.
Right, before we go to the comment section, Glenn Wilcox, I think you wanted to make a comment from the end of the table there, since you don't have the ability at this body to speak to the general debate.
I'd just like to say, and I'd like to bring it back to the personal level with regards to the time and season rule, was what really impressed on me was a man came along to the Onehunga hearings, and the thing he said was, I go out with my dog and the tide's in because the times are wrong. And I thought, yes, we need to make allowance that actually nature doesn't care what we say. And so, you know, that was part of my reasoning with regards to the new times. And I like people to think that we've got to make it personal because it affects people personally. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now, there may not be the need for... Oh, actually, I think there is, actually, and I'm going to invite Kathy Casey to begin the comment section.
I'd like to start by thanking Linda and Wayne and Glenn. And Glenn and I went through this. This is the second time that we went through the first bylaw as well. And there was a lot of the time was a sense of déjà vu because the outcome is exactly the same as we had back in 2012. It's a good outcome. It's a very good outcome. We listened hard to the people who came along. I also want to thank Michael and Shilpa and the team. And the team are sitting up the back, and I'd quite like them to stand up because they're hiding. Get up. Get up. Get up. That's better. That's better. And just on a personal note, I've found the staff to be amazingly informative and so professional at what they do. Shilpa can tell you the dog rule for any inch of Auckland region, and I'm telling you, we've tested her. Amazingly professional, amazingly informative, and I'm very privileged to have worked with them. And it's because of that, I need to say this, and I said it at the cat hearing or the cat issue as well, but under no circumstances should our staff be abused, either face-to-face, in writing, or via social media. They don't make the decisions. The statement of proposal that went out was a decision made by us through the Regulatory Committee. It was our deal. It's not their deal. And so I was in a few forums where I personally felt put upon. I can't imagine, like, we get that all the time. That's part and parcel of the job. They don't. And there's no circumstances where staff of ours should go home at night in tears or feeling that, why am I doing this job? So anybody who's listening, if you want to make a submission, we do hear, we do listen and hear. We do, the politicians. They are doing their job to support us. And under no circumstances should you be abusing them. Full stop. Thank you so much. End of story.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker, you're also on the panel. Would you like to take a quick call on this one?
Only really to make the comment that we certainly listened. There were a huge number of submissions. I don't think that there are too many people, particularly people with dogs, of whom I'm one, that are any worse off. So I think it's been a good process. Having said that, I do make the observation that there is a lot of flexibility that the local boards have. I would hope that there will be some synergy between the local boards across the region, particularly in broad areas like, let's say, the North Shore North and the like, because there are differences across the region. It isn't one size fits all, and I think the local boards will be picking up on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Just a couple of brief observations, perhaps to give a little balance to comments. And I guess firstly, it is necessary to acknowledge the fact that the panel members obviously did listen to the people that were submitting and took on board what people were saying and responded accordingly. That doesn't always happen, but obviously it happened in this time. As far as my area goes, I really find it a little ironic that that the aim has been to reduce public confusion during this process, because certainly the feedback I'm getting when I talk to people is that they appear to be more confused now than they ever were. So I would suggest that there is going to have to be a bit of an education program here to actually inform people what the new rules are, because communities, and particularly communities north of the bridge, have been through this process several times. It causes a lot of angst. This process has caused a lot of angst. There's been a lot of very concerned and agitated people. That's reflected in the submission process. So as much as, you know, we perhaps giving ourselves a slap on the back, there is a lot of concern out of people in the community, particularly dog owners, with what was proposed, because that was a more restrictive regime, a far more restrictive regime. And for a lot of those people now, that sense of that change will still exist. And so that's going to have to be communicated. It's not. In fact, just about every area, it's got less restrictive. But that sort of information might occur in here. It doesn't always filter out to people in the community. As far as listening to people go, I mean, if you look at the time and season proposal, which was probably the centrepiece of it, you still had a big majority of people were still wanting that local variation, and didn't really want the one size fits all. They've got the one size fits all to a great extent with the time and season, and I think they were right. I think that Auckland is, in this issue and in plenty of others besides, there are differences, and that kind of almost Prussian-like move to regimented efficiency across the board doesn't work. And just look at the submission figures. So you had basically well over half the submissions were coming north of the bridge. That's because there's a lot more people own dogs, and B, there's a lot more beaches where people like to exercise their dogs on. Now, I'm not for a minute going to suggest that Army Bay is the same as Mission Bay. There's a whole lot of different elements that go into that. And who are the people best suited to make that sort of call? It is the local boards, and I think they've done it rather successfully. So as much as we have come up with a regime and listened to what people have said, there might now be other people that don't feel quite so pleased. I don't know. They haven't perhaps engaged in the process on the assumption that things were going to be more restrictive. So I don't know. So I guess I go back to that old saying, leave well enough alone. And for me, before this all started, it was well enough in most areas, certainly in the area I represent. And people have, I guess, from the dog community have benefited, but there has been a lot of angst. There will need to be clear communication, but I guess, if we look at what's come out the end, well, then it's maybe not a bad deal. But I think this needs to be a learning exercise for the future, where there are contentious issues that have been through the ringer, that do cause a lot of concern, that deal with a little bit of sensitivity and pragmatism. And I think that perhaps could have been a bit more evident here. So thank you to the panel members again, and also to the community who engaged in that and who have proved to be, no pun intended, very useful watchdogs.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to start off by acknowledging Councillor Cooper, Casey, Walker and Member Wilcox on the effort around this, and the time commitment. Well done. I think you have come up with a good recommendation, a recommendation that I'm happy to support, Your Worship. I would, however, qualify that I would like it noted, if we could work up some wording, that I don't support the default being on leash across Auckland. Obviously there's a call there, I just don't agree with it. I think it would have been less expensive to have gone with the on leash. We couldn't get any quantitative figures there, but common sense would tell you that. There's greenfield subdivisions occurring right across Auckland, as we heard from the Hibiscus and Bays local board, as I've heard from other local boards, that instead of those parks being off-leash, they will now be on-leash, unless the local board goes to the cost and the effort of consulting on that. And we heard that that will have to come out of their budgets. that puts extra costs and efforts onto local boards in the greenfield development areas of Auckland. So, Your Worship, I'm happy to support the recommendation if we could just work up a note around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I just want to conclude the debate by joining with others and thanking Linda Cooper and the members of the panel. I don't think the public actually get a picture of how many hours and how much hard work goes into this, and equally to thank the officers for the very thorough job that you've obviously done. It is very hard to find absolute agreement, and dog owners and people who don't own dogs often have quite different views on what's appropriate, and it's finding the balance there. And I think the effort that you've put in has found the balance and has achieved as close to a broad agreement as we're likely to get. But I'm just in awe at over 8,000 submissions. I think, Councillor Cooper, you said 64,000 emails, 34,000 texts and 5,000 letters. And people,
What we sent out, Mr. Chairman, to get engagement.
And people say, what does council do? Well, here's an example. It's an example of democracy at work. It's long, it's involved. It's probably less efficiency than a dictatorial system, but it is democracy, and people did have their say and they were listened to, and I think we can applaud that. With those comments, let's put the... Oh, sorry,
I'm quite
you've got the right of
concerned
reply,
about
of
some
course.
of the comments made about...
Councillor Cooper.
We have a legal obligation. We can't leave well enough alone. We have to review our bylaws every 5 years. We have to go out and have these hard conversations sometimes. And if we look at the first proposal, it was actually to come in line with 13 local boards who'd made time and season more restrictive, and another 4 who'd made it, had changed as well. We were actually trying to fit a policy to what was operational, but what we really heard out there was, we don't like that. And at the same breath, the same people were saying, we want local variation, but we want more time. And so it was interesting. And I think from what we heard, and we heard it very loud and clear and sometimes shouted right in our faces, pretty unpleasant, but most people were fantastic. What we heard was, I think, especially from the north, was they were scared that if they wanted local variation because they wanted to retain their access. So what we've done is we've given them that access. They can retain that access. And I think that is why a lot of people said local variation, and I think there's probably a collective sigh of relief for them Hibiscus Bays and a lot of the North Shore area that they will retain the access they had, and some of them will get more. So I can't agree that we should leave well enough alone, because actually we'll get a better outcome now than what we had before for dog owners. So I'm very pleased, and thank you for everybody engaging in this, and particularly our staff. Some of them were very, very abused and still came back for more. So thank you. I commend this to you.
Thank you very much. We'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Just with my note, Your Worship.
With the note from Councillor Sayer.